Hi, I'm Arlen Geyer, and today I'd like to do a brief discussion of how the histogram in Adobe Lightroom works. The histogram in Lightroom is similar to the histogram in your camera and the histogram in Photoshop. The one in your camera, if it is displayed, all color information probably displays it as three separate graphs, whereas Lightroom superimposes all three colors together. Your camera also may have an option to just do a luminance histogram where you would have only the gray area, only the brightness, and not the values of the different colors. So this is what the histogram in Lightroom looks like, and this histogram, basically the histogram, white is on the right, black is on the left, and all shades in between are in between. And so this image, the histogram, the mountains, okay, here's my terminology. We've got mountains, and we've got sea level, and we've got the black end of the world and the white end of the world. So we've got a finite world, and we've got sea level, and we've got mountains. So in the typical ideal situation, your mountains come down to sea level right at the end of the world in both the black and white edges. But they don't pile up at the edges. So this one is showing that the mountains are coming down to sea level at the black end, and very nicely, so that you have your dark areas of the image are just touching on black, but not going past that. And on the white edge, you can see here that actually they are not reaching the edge, which is telling you there's nothing that's white in this image, which of course we can tell by looking at the image. Now let's move on to another example here. And on this one, you can see actually it's falling just very slightly shy of black, and it's falling quite a bit shy of white. And we've got some colors in between. And we'll look at another one. Here, again, nothing black, but now you see there's a very tiny bit extending out here. So there's some white in here, very, very little bit of white in here. In this one, you can see a few peaks. You've got a few mountain peaks. And now you can see that the one on the white side is blue, indicating that that's blue. What a surprise. But notice that it's not going off the edge. It's coming down just before the end of the world. But it's showing that now what would be white or neutral, so gray or white, would be wherever this gray comes to the end. So the only neutral area that you've got is this brightness in this range right here. But in this particular situation, you don't really want the sky to be white. So having the blue come up to the edge like that is probably entirely appropriate here. You can see that the blacks are not, there's nothing that's black here, that the darkest area in here is only a pretty dark gray. It's not black because it's not reaching the edge of the histogram. Another example here, the lightest areas are reaching the edge just barely. There's nothing that's black. In this one, you can see that it's piled up on the black side. The histogram is showing that you've got you're over the edge. Your mountains are going past the edge of the world here on the black side. On the white side, it's just touching it. All right, one more. And this one, nothing anywhere near white, which of course you can tell looking at the image. The black side is just going to the edge. Let's see here, we've got just a few more to look at here. This one, you can see that there's some tiny bits of white. Right here, there's a little bit of white, and you can see in the histogram. Now you notice that the mountains are piled up in the dark side, but they don't go off the edge on the dark side. It comes very steeply down, which says there's nothing that's clipping on the black side. I'll explain clipping in a moment. There's nothing that's going off the edge on the black side, which is clipping. But and there's very little that's anywhere other than that very dark area, other than just little tiny specks, which is exactly what you see in the image. And you can see that there are little tiny specks of white in here. And so let's go on to another one. This one is an underexposed image. The sky is way down here. If this is black and this is white, this would be middle gray right here. And you can see that that sky is right in the middle there. Probably ought to be lighter than that. A similar scene, same situation. With more exposure, you can see now that the sky is way up here. And you've got this gray area here would be the clouds, and this is the sky. And you can see they're both reaching very close to white. And on the dark side, you're not quite reaching black. One last one. And let me turn off this so you don't get confused for the moment. And you can see that the white side is actually crashing into the mountains, or into the edge of the world. The white mountains are crashing into the edge of the world, and the black mountains are not quite reaching the edge. Okay, so those are the initial exposures here. Now, one thing that's really useful to do in the histogram in Lightroom is to turn on the clipping indicators. This is the white clipping indicator. This is the black clipping indicator. You just click those so that they're highlighted. And if you're clipping in the white, which means that your white areas are losing detail because they are going off the edge of the world, then you get that is highlighted in red. If the black area is clipping, meaning that you're losing detail in the dark areas because it's going off the edge of the world. And basically what that means is that the image can only generate a certain value of black and a certain value of white, and if you have stuff that should be beyond that, it ends up just being white. If you try to get whiter than white, it's still just white, which means you don't have any detail there. And that is what happens when you go off the edge of the world. And in this situation, you'd have to decide whether that's acceptable or not. If it's not, the classic way to deal with that in Lightroom was to push the highlights down, and that can often do a very good job of pulling that back in again. If you're shooting in RAW, you have more headroom to do that than if you're shooting JPEG files. So take a look at just a couple more. On this one, you can see that the blacks are clipping, which is indicated in the histogram that they're going off the edge of the world. But with the clipping indicator on, you can see this blue showing that it's going off the edge there. And you can see this image has already been adjusted. And in this case, what we probably want to do is to increase the blacks a bit so that we don't get that clipping. And so we just pull that up until we maybe starting to get just a touch of that blue indicator, because it probably wouldn't matter if we have just a tiny bit of lost detail in the very darkest areas, but we don't want to have as much as there was initially. And here's this underexposed image. Again, this was the more properly exposed one of the same situation. And here's the underexposed one. In this case, we'd want to bring the exposure up and bring the exposure up until the blue there is getting really close to white, right about in there. And then notice that that pushed everything up. The darkest values are reaching appropriately there. If we wanted to darken them a little bit, we could push that down like that, but we don't really want to go any much further than that. Just out of curiosity, let's see what happens, how far we have to go to start clipping. And you can see there we're starting to get those blue indicators. So if we wanted to use that clipping as a guide for setting our blacks, we can just move this up until just starting to get just a tiny bit of clipping in the very, very darkest areas. And let's just see what happens if we do the same thing with the exposure and the highlights. And we can move up quite a bit before we get clipping there, but we really don't want to go that high. We want to keep some blue in the sky. So we probably wouldn't want to go any higher than, say, around there to keep that blue in the sky. All right, so those are the, sometimes you don't necessarily want white in your image. In this situation, I'd probably want to take a look at what happens if I increase the exposure a little bit. And I actually kind of like that. It's a little brighter, but I've lost my dark areas, so now I'm going to push the blacks down to get it so that I'm reaching the edge there. You can see now I'm starting to get a little bit of clipping, so I back that off like that. And there you go. So that's how to use the histogram. It's showing you the values in the image. The various shapes of the mountains are really are an indication of what's in the scene. So, for example, in this one, you have a dark peak, which is this tree limb here, the very dark part of the image. That's this peak right here, and the peak in the very top is the bright sky, and then the stuff in between is the values in between. Whereas on this one, you have a more uniform peak because it's a more uniform range of colors in the image. And just one more to take a look at while we're doing this. This one here, you can see there's nothing white in here. You can see that we actually are starting to get some clipping in the dark areas already, but I would push the exposure up until we get the lights where you want it, and then maybe I would bring the highlights down just a little bit to make a little more detail in there. something like that. But anyway, so the primary thing I wanted to show you here is the histogram, what it means, and how you can use it to improve your exposures. Thanks. I hope that was useful.